welcome everyone to the 19th Annual Allies in Prevention Gathering. I'm proud to be here today, not only as SCAN's president of the board of directors, but also as a career educator. And after you hear Lacy's presentation, I think you'll understand why I say that. And as the staff is pulling up the slide of Lacy's book, I just want to thank my additional SCAN board members, including Dave Cleary, our founder, for being on the event today. And also I want to thank Leah Fraley, our executive director, and the hardworking staff at SCAN who put today's program together. For those of you who haven't read Lacy Crawford's memoir, Notes on a Silencing, you'll get the opportunity to receive a free copy following today's event. And it's one of those books you won't be able to put down. Notes on a Silencing was named a New York Times Editor's Choice and Notable Book, as well as a Best Book of 2020 by Time, People, NPR, BookPage, Library Journal, and LitHub. You may have read Lacy's writing in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, or Vanity Fair, but today she joins us to tell her own story. I know we will learn from her and from each other on how to make all spaces safer for children. Please join me in welcoming childhood abuse survivor and critically acclaimed author, Lacy Crawford. Lacy?
Thank you so much, Marty. Thank you, Leah. And thank you, SCAN, for the opportunity to speak to practitioners. I have, since my book came out, had the opportunity to talk to so many survivors and book clubs and other organizations, but I haven't yet had the chance deliberately to talk to a room full of the people who do the work that would have helped me, frankly, had I been a part of this community. So thank you so much for the work that you do. In trying to think how to talk today, I thought that I would speak not so much as a survivor, but as a practitioner myself by drawing on what I do, which is that I write. So I want to tell you what writing taught me about children, safety, and surviving. So first, here's the case. This is my case. When I was 15, in October of 1990, I was assaulted by two 18-year-old boys. We were students at a wealthy and elite New England boarding school in New Hampshire, which was 1,000 miles from my home in Chicago. The boys penetrated my throat so far, I had to concentrate to breathe. This was a statutory assault in New Hampshire at the time. The boys bragged about our threesome. I had no word for what happened in that room. A little more than a week later, my throat was so sore that it was difficult to eat. I had a fever and I had lost almost 10 pounds. The school sent me to an ear, nose, and throat physician in nearby Concord, New Hampshire, off campus. And using specialized tools, this ENT was able to see that I had contracted herpes in the hypopharyngeal space in my throat, where the gag reflex sits. Back at school, I was given a cyclovir. But the school didn't tell me, or my parents, or my pediatrician back at home in Chicago, what I had. I managed to get through my junior year, though I remained sick because I was untreated. In May, so about 6 months after the assault, I finally told my mom. I called her, and she called the school. The school conducted an internal investigation that did not include me. And they decided that the assault had been consensual and that they had no need to report. They went through my medical records at the school's infirmary and told the senior boys on the lacrosse team that if they had ever been intimate with Lacy Crawford, they ought to go to the infirmary to get checked out for herpes. I still didn't know what was wrong with my throat. At home in Chicago, a few weeks later, my pediatrician ran STD tests and reported my assault to the state of New Hampshire. 10 days later, she called my house to tell me that my throat swab had tested positive for herpes. My father picked up the phone and called the school to tell them this news. The dean of students replied, "How do we know Lacy didn't give it to the boys?" The Department of Youth and Family Services in Manchester, New Hampshire called Concord police, and this was the first time the authorities learned of my assault. They wanted to press charges against the boys who had both graduated by then, one of them with several prizes, and left the state. The school communicated to my father that if I went ahead with the state's choice to press charges, I would not be permitted to return to campus for my senior year. If they put me on the stand, the school told my father, they would say that I was a drug dealer, that I was promiscuous, and that I was not a good girl. Those were their words, good girl, not a good girl. I told the police I didn't want charges brought, and like magic, I was allowed to return for my senior year and graduate. That was all 30 years ago. I survived. In 2017, the state of New Hampshire opened a criminal investigation into my school, St. Paul's School, because of years of accounts of assault and abuse and cover-up on campus. I joined this investigation wholly confidentially. I told the police everything I've just told you. Somehow, the school found out I was working with the police and had their law firm contact me. A Concord detective, upset by this, drove to the school the next day and found in my student file, which was at that point 25 years old, documented evidence not only of the assault, but also of the threat that I could not return to campus if I did not drop charges. The police called this document the smoking gun. But when the detectives presented my case to the New Hampshire Attorney General, they were immediately severed. They were told that the documents they had received could not be used, even though these pages had been given with the proper consents to the police. I called the Attorney General's investigator myself. He said he was sorry and he wanted to do right by me, but that he had to follow protocol. I should mention that the lawyer who wrote the plan for my silencing back in 1991 was, and still is, a prominent attorney in the state of New Hampshire. He specializes in defamation cases and has worked to defend men convicted of sex crimes, particularly to have them removed from sex offender registries. So I was now in my 40s, this is 2017, and I had proof of this incredible trauma that had shaped my life and also proof of the cover-up that had re-traumatized me for years. I had been silenced when I was a teenage girl by my school and their attorney. And now I was being silenced again by the state. I thought truly that I would die if I allowed this to happen. But what could I do? So I considered my options. A lawsuit is expensive and risky. I could have gone to the news, but the media has its own agenda. I was a writer. I could write my story. I could tell it myself. But could I write something that would go out into the world? The marketplace for memoirs of sexual assault is horribly crowded. That's horrible in and of itself. In order to sell my story as a book, I'd need to make people care. Not just that a bad thing happened, bad things happen all the time. And I didn't want just prurient curiosity or interest in bad things at an elite boarding school. I didn't want to trade on trauma or privilege, even though both conditions were true. I needed to make people see themselves in my story, to empathize with me on the page so strongly that they would keep reading as though it were their story too. I'm going to suggest that this is the challenge that faces every victim who speaks up, particularly every child. To move readers, I couldn't write the experience using the terms I've just used here. Words like assault, STD, reporting, or protocol. That wasn't my language as a girl. That's the language of the fields of practice that are in place to address these events once they occur. I had to tell the girl's story, which meant going back and re-embodying her, this girl that I had been and I had long ago tried to leave behind. I had hated being that girl. Here's where I think my experience writing might offer some insight for practitioners of other fields of witness, because you are all, in one way or another, in a field of witness. The stories of injured young people will be given to you to hold and to address using the tools of your training and your field. Some of these tools are meant to provide legal recourse, some therapeutic remedy. I think too few are meant to change society. But no child is abused in isolation, and every child's story is a roadmap to the community. It identifies lines and spaces of power, shame, and danger. Every experience of assault offers us the chance to make other kids safer. But to allow this, I think we have to hear each story as though it's ours to write. So, how would you tell it? Well, you'd begin by knowing that a child never exists alone, but is always in community and brings to every interaction a universe worth of experiences and expectations and understandings about herself and other people and what is possible and what is not. These are the writer's tools of character, setting, and point of view. You'd also seek to understand dramatic action, plot, the stakes. The child will tell the truth in her own words. We call this diction and style. And when you arrive at a truth about society, you will have hit on theme. For example, I told you that when I was 15, I was assaulted by two 18-year-olds, but that's not my experience of what happened. What happened is that the captain of the ice hockey team, who was enormously tall and scary, called me on the payphone in my dorm one night. He was popular. I was not. He was experienced. I was very naive. This is character. He sounded like he was crying, and he told me something had happened to his mom. He begged me to leave my dorm and visit him in his room. I did. That's plot. Here's point of view. Nothing was ever going to happen to my body in his room. It literally did not occur to me. I was a nerd in his math class, and he dated this beautiful senior. I also didn't know that his roommate would be there, or even who his roommate was. His roommate had a girlfriend too, and I knew her pretty well. I didn't know these boys would be in their underwear, and I didn't understand why they were when I arrived. They shushed me. They told me their dorm advisor lived just the other side of their wall. And then I understood that if this faculty member heard a girl's voice in the boys' dorm, he'd come in, flip on the lights, and see me there with two seniors. I'd be suspended. It would go on my record and hurt my college prospects. Those were the stakes. College admissions, not assault. It was my parents' faces when I got flown home on suspension, not a lifetime of reckoning with sexual trauma. In writing, we call this dramatic tension, also character. These are the things I knew and that mattered to me. One of the boys had been crying. At least I thought he was on the phone. But now there were two of them, and I was more confused than I'd ever been in my life. It was then that they pushed me down. And once I understood that this was going to involve my body and that I could not stop them, I said, just don't have sex with me. I was a virgin. That's our only line of dialogue. These words were later taken to signify verbal consent. While they were assaulting me, I kept thinking, but they have girlfriends. I was still clinging to the world I thought I knew, the rules I knew, which were not criminal codes or even school rules, but the expectations of my community of peers. This is character again, also setting. And when they let me go, I knew I was shattered, but I didn't understand how, because my body seemed fine. I couldn't find the injury. All of this is plot. It was, of course, that I had just met with a form of violence that I had been lucky to never encounter before. And before it entered my body, this violence disrupted my field of belief about the realities of my life and my community. And if there was a trauma, it was here, in the shattering of my sense of anticipation, my belief that I was a good, smart girl who was safe. This is theme. And I believe this theme is the DNA of every instance of child abuse on Earth. We've arrived at it pretty quickly. So I wonder, what if we could use the tools of memoir to meet victims where they are? It's not practical, I understand. The way I understand it, the field of response to child assault is the creation of a set of very different and narrow narratives. Police must understand facts, but not make inferences. Pediatricians will take swabs. Administrators will try to match up accounts from parties on opposite sides of the line of injury. Parents will try to understand how. I will not speak of defense attorneys and institutional counsel. Each one of these stories, however well-intentioned, is a project of overwriting the child's experience. We know that the response very frequently is re-traumatizing. No one is writing the book that now lives inside the child, that now threatens to undo her, where the event is reshaping everything she knows about herself and the world. You can know the boys told me their dorm head would hear me if I made noise, but you can't know how my father's voice would have sounded on the phone had I been caught in that room after hours. You can know that I didn't tell the school's infirmary staff about the assault when I went there because I couldn't eat. But you can't know the years of singing in my church choir that led me to believe that I was being punished by God for what I had done. You can know I was the victim of statutory rape twice more that year at school. But you can't know the sound of the senior boys' shoes on the brick paths behind me going to class every day, and how it seemed safer to just lie there than challenge them no. When I tell you my throat got so bad I couldn't talk at times, was literally silenced, that's metaphor. It's a metaphor so stark I had to be careful writing it in my book, lest my editor think it overdetermined. And when the school told my classmates I had herpes, they poisoned my community for me for years. This gossip followed me for a decade. To defend against it, I'd have to tell people how I had contracted it. So I either told them about the worst moment of my life or I was silent. I believe most victims of abuse can relate in some way to this Hobson's choice. When the school told my parents I would be expelled if we did not drop the charge of a cover-up, because they would say I was a drug dealer and promiscuous and so on, it opened a gap between my parents and me that has never healed. We might call that witness tampering now, but to me, it means that my parents don't know their grandsons. My school's lawyer told the Concord police that I had not gone to the infirmary with the symptoms of herpes. He said I had a sore throat because of my extended use of Prozac. It's true that I had taken a small dose of Prozac for 9 months. That's backstory, by the way, in the memoir. I thought it was a secret between me and my parents and my doctor. When I read this piece of information in my police file, which I only received in late 2020, I did not think, oh my God, look at this sterling example of institutional silencing and potentially obstruction of justice. I just thought, you liar, you thief. What I'm suggesting is an exercise in empathy that isn't about being thoughtful or kind, but asks you to imagine having to write this story, each child's story from the inside. How do you make it not just a case, not just a report, but an experience? That was my job. I've been very lucky with my book's reception, but this is what I had to do in order to put my story into the world. And every child who's victimized, if he or she is to find any sort of remedy, must do this in some way. You have to make someone else not know, but understand who you were and what you lost. This is the task children have when they decide to say what happened. I believe that imagining using the tools of narrative writing could illuminate all that a case of abuse has to teach us. Because if you're going to create real characters on the page, you have to understand what they want and what they're afraid of. And if you think you know what happened, try to write it as though the book is yours. What would your reader have to know? Setting, character, point of view. This will show you the dangers, in my case, of a boarding school that was fully enclosed, rigidly hierarchical, utterly patriarchal, and loaded with privilege. And of a girl who believed that her safety was her own responsibility and that any injury was her shame. Movement through time in a memoir is critical. Here's some of mine. No penalties were ever given to the boys who assaulted me, or the school leaders, or their lawyer who silenced and shamed me. One of my rapists has gone on to assault other women. The other has spent half his life entangled in the criminal justice system, including lengthy jail time. When they silenced me, it was not only me. The school failed. Philosophers call this narrative work phenomenology. It's the experience of experience. It's the careful tracking of what it feels like to be a person. When writers do this well, in fiction or memoir, we stay up late to finish reading every time. And I believe that if the bodies of practice that work to educate and protect children could see outside the narratives of their systems, they'd be shown more clearly the shape of the injury to the child, and therefore how to stand with her, how to hold her, and the spaces of power and danger that made that assault possible. What expectations did this child hold, and who fostered them? How loudly could she yell, and who was there to hear? And what would they do once they did? So this is what I wanted to offer this Zoom room full of professionals. The understanding of that moment when I realized in my 40s that I had to use my voice, but that in order to do so effectively, I had to tell a story rich enough that other people would want to know more. Every victim, I think, works in the face of this fear and this disbelief, this distraction, this exhaustion, whether you're a memoirist or a fifth grader. The second thing I wanted to offer is the perspective you might borrow of writing the story you receive. It's tricky because memoir is by definition subjective, and justice is always chasing objective truth. I'm no longer a child. I understand this. Still, I believe that even when the agreed upon facts align with the victim's account, if we're not hearing her subjectivity, we're not meeting her where she is. But if we can hear her, sit beside her, write her story as though it were our own, her world will reveal itself, and we'll know better how to keep children safe.
Thank you, Lacy. I want to thank you for being here and for giving language to something. I know that survivors and supporters of survivors and professionals don't necessarily know that they need language for. I read your book, I read your speech, and I've said to absolutely everyone I've spoken to, these are things that I didn't know I needed to hear. And so thank you for that. I appreciate you giving us the lens. The storytelling lens is such a novel way of going about understanding someone else's experience. I have said the words adultism more in the last week after kind of consuming everything that you could give us because it made such sense to me. I'd love to open the chat to accept a few questions. I'll ask a member of my team to help me ask these or to read the chat and ask these questions. I'd actually like to kick it off. The team and I read the book together and discussed, the team at SCAN read the book together and discussed, and we had a couple of questions. So if it's okay, I'd like to kick off our conversation with questions they had. Question number one, after we finished the book, we wanted to read it again. That's true of everybody on staff. It's clear that at some point you went from being a child to be protected to a problem that needed to be solved. I'd love to know when you think that happened.
My understanding of when that happened, which I only had clarity on once I joined the state investigation in 2017 and saw the documents in my file, was when my mom called the school and reported what I had told her, that it was an assault, although I doubt she would have used that word back in 1991. And the school then, I now know, went back through my records. They went to the infirmary and they pulled my health file, and they saw that I had shown up in the infirmary with this horrible sore throat that nobody could see anything wrong with until they sent me to the ENT because it was so far down, about 10 days after the day I had reported being assaulted, at which point the school knew there was clinical evidence of a statutory assault. So you go one of two ways with that as an institution. You either mobilize to help this child and change your school's culture stat, or you make her go away. And it's pretty clear what they chose.
You do, yeah. Lori, do you want to unmute and offer?
Yes, one of the questions that we got from the participants was, do you know if anyone advocated for reform of how the school or other legal professionals address these types of incidents in your area, whether in the area or in the school itself?
I do now, because of the book. I have been drawn into this community of people who are working to particularly make children on residential boarding campuses safer. There exists no community of practice between these independent schools. My school's endowment is $750 million. That's what they're sitting on up there, and they don't have, any set of best practices or tools or any means of acquiring those things for addressing the assault, which continues on their campus and on other campuses, of course. So I am aware of nonprofit initiatives that are seeking to build exactly that community of practice. And I'm also aware of the schools being offended that at the suggestion that they should, worry about things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Lacy. One of the questions we had too was, why did you return to school?
So I was 16 the summer that they silenced me. I'd been 15 at the time of the assault, and I was a rising senior. I was an excellent student. I was a tri-varsity athlete. I was on 3 choirs. I did everything I was asked to do, and the boys had graduated. One of them won the top athletic prize. His picture was all over the place, and I think, in a 16-year-old way, I didn't think they should get that school, and I didn't, because of what they did. It was stubbornness, really. And I think not wishing for the school to become a mythic place that I had lost somehow. I had already lost enough.
A number of questions are here. One of them is, did you receive any counseling while you were in school?
No, actually, the licensed clinical psychologist who was the director of counseling on campus at the time, I did see her once, and she shared the notes of that meeting with the school's administration and the school's attorney, and was part of the decision to not report and to consider the case consensual. So HIPAA violations had not been federalized at that point, although her choice was clearly a HIPAA violation. But I was not referred to a therapist on campus. There was somebody who I could have seen in town, but I, at that point, was so walled off from the thought that anybody might help me that I'm not sure I would even have gone.
Thank you. And the last question, some of the other questions we will be covering in the panel, but I thought this one, what worked well from your perspective, with family services and your involvement with them?
So this is remarkable. I didn't know this until I saw my police file. It took me 3 years to get my police records, 2017 to 2020. So my pediatrician reported to the Department of Youth and Family Services in Manchester. I forget what their specific acronym was back then. And they are the ones who called Concord Police. And as I read through this huge file, they are the ones who kept on this. So Concord Police opened a criminal case, and they started making inquiries, and you see the school stonewalling. You see my little handwritten note saying, I do not wish to have charges brought against the boys. All of that is in there. But DCFS kept following up. This woman kept following up, and I cried when I read this finally, because somebody out there saw what was going on and was in a public service position to do something about it. And this private institution, which is a nonprofit, by the way, but this private institution managed to stonewall so much that she couldn't do her job. And I would have been safer had I not been in this space of so much privilege, in this one way. So I've sometimes dreamed of writing to this organization and saying, if you can find this woman who called on my behalf 30 years ago, can you tell her that I know now that she was trying?
I love that. Sorry, I'm not paying attention. Laura spoke to this, but we have an incredible diverse group of panelists with with us to take on this conversation. I just want to say thank you again, Lacy, for your story, for giving so many survivors a voice, and using it in a way that challenges us to do things differently. To your point in what you said, you could just tell a story, but you told a story in the way so that you are working in prevention, and I'm so grateful for you, and so thank you.
Thank you.
So we have an incredible, and we're going to start pinning them here. We have an incredible diverse group of educators, people from the government, child and victim advocates, academia, child serving institutions, to dig deeper into this conversation at a very kind of local level. And so I want to welcome Dr. Cheryl Shakeshaft from Virginia Commonwealth University. I'm going to pause here while we get everybody pinned so you can see them. Valerie Cuffey from the Department of Family Services in Loudoun County. John Taylor Chapman, councilperson from Alexandria City. Mary Hale from the U.S. National Guard Sexual Assault Program Response. Here, Caffrey, the social worker from Adams Center. And Lori Tosharsky, the Director of Institutional Abuse Prevention at SCAN, who will be your facilitator.
Thank you so much, Leah, and I share your appreciation for this panel. I thought of who do I want to have weigh in and have a conversation with, and these are exactly the people. So thank you all panelists for joining us. And I want to encourage our guests, who are some of you beginning to put your ideas and thoughts into the chat. Please continue to do that. We want this to be a community conversation, and at the end, we're going to have a chance to capture some of your ideas about the topics that you want to talk about with others in your sphere. So please continue to jot down those notes for yourself as the panel talks. Lacy's story highlights some of the ideas we're used to considering, those of gender bias, those of power within institutions, but there were a few things that struck me as being quite novel or new. And one of those is the idea that the language of the victim, in this case it's a girl, is not the language of the adults who respond. And yet it's the adult version that gets written into documents, that gets told in court, and in many cases overwrites the victim experience and becomes their truth. And so I think taking a moment to spend time on that will help us bring that to the front of our work. I'm going to start with Cheryl. Lacy tells us that we need to understand, I'm just going to read what she said because I think it's so, I love her words, who the victim was and what they lost. Cheryl, you've been researching this topic, as have many of the panelists, looking at hundreds of cases in your career. What strikes you about this one?
Well, a couple of things. This case is not unlike hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cases where we find that institutions protect themselves, not the student, that the institution is created for the needs of the adults, not the safety of the children, and that institutions compound trauma. So that's the unfortunate old story that just keeps happening. It's still happening. But it's also the case that institutions change the story and the words of the students, of the children. And even those who want to be supportive of the victim wants the victim to change their words. Don't want to say, I was needy. Don't want to say, I was intimidated. Don't want to say, I was flattered. You know, there are all sorts of things that are part of the way people are exploited that we try to erase as if that's not part of the normal pattern. And I see us trying to get the story to be more linear, without any rough edges, but all the stories have rough edges. They're not linear. They're all the stories of children and adolescents and people growing up. And so this story, as it's told, is wonderful. It's an awful story that's told wonderfully in a way to say, this is a person here. This is what that person felt and experienced and had. And so I think this is a really important lesson for us to take home about how much the words are important and how much we need to stop trying to influence them and change them and make them to sound just different. Let us accept the words of the victim and honor them.
Yeah, thank you, Cheryl, so much for that. Lacy spoke eloquently about the burden on victims. She described the impossible choice of reliving the worst moment of her life or being silent. She said that sexual assault reshaped everything she knew about herself and the world. Suhir, if I could come to you and you'll unmute for us, how can we, as the responding adults, help those who've been harmed have broader choices?
Yes, first of all, Lacy, thank you so much for sharing your story. That takes a lot of courage. Thank you so much, and especially so many years later. And thank you, Lori, for the question. I really think that as adults and as trusted adults, we really need to be well informed on how our reaction affects the individual telling us the story. And so we need to learn how to react, actually. You know, we need to learn how to react so we don't cause the individual more trauma. And we need to also be able to be trained on that and train those among us that interact with us within our organizations and schools, nonprofits. You know, for example, I'm in a nonprofit. We had one sexual abuse case, and then we reached out to Darkness to Light and got the entire staff and teachers trained on sexual abuse prevention. You need to learn how to do that. We've got 78 people trained. And so it is something that needs to happen so we do not cause further trauma for the victim. And they are a victim of this. And to also show them that we believe them.
Thank you. Suhir, Mary, you're a victim advocate. How can we as practitioners support victim recovery?
Well, I think it's really important to look at initially what those response systems are, and to go back to what Suhir was saying, the training that they've received. Previously, I worked with a forensic nursing program that provided service across all of Northern Virginia. And what I found was the response capability was different from county to county. And some counties that had child advocacy centers and specially trained detectives and specially trained prosecutors. And within the forensic nursing program, we had specially trained pediatrician, all of these practitioners who understand trauma-informed care. They understand, to what Lacy said, having trained forensic interviewers who know how to create that space and capture the child's story from their point of view and validate what they're feeling and what their experience is. And other counties, the counties that had the resources in place, I mean, I saw it firsthand. You would see, even if it was an allegation the child hadn't disclosed, but then evidence came forward, seeing their journey through recovery, it was vastly different and much, much better than locations that didn't have those resources. And important too, to have systems in place that support parents and caregivers in helping and supporting that child in their recovery and healing. So I always give a foot stomp. So if there's any elected officials joining this call, but really, or anyone, to ask that of our elected officials, if they give voice to the importance of protecting children and keeping our communities safe, the reality is the resources have to be there. So these systems are available. Child Protective Services cannot be severely understaffed and underfunded if we truly say we care about children. So I would say the response piece has to be as robust as possible. And that in and of itself, I think, can make a massive difference for that child when they come forward and report something has happened.
Thank you so much, Mary. That's a great point. We have an elected official on the panel, so I want to give John a chance to jump in here. And we do have some who are listening and have questions that I'll ask next. John?
No, but I think, I don't know if I can say it better than Mary said it there. I mean, because that's the key issue, key question for us as elected officials. If we believe that this is a priority, we have to find that funding or raise that funding to make it happen. I don't want to basically say what Mary said, because Mary said it perfectly. But that's the response that elected officials like me and those who are on the call and others need to do. We need to make sure this is a priority for us, especially when we are dealing with our budgets, because without that robust set of systems, we don't have the right response. So absolutely, Mary, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for John. Thank you for that, John. And there's been a comment in the chat from Jennifer that the Virginia Senate is moving the ball forward for sexual assault victims. So thank you for that comment there. I want to ask, I think we're headed that direction anyway. And one of the questions I have is, some things are clearly different now from the 1990s. What's different? And what's the same? And I'm going to go to you, Valerie, because you are living it on the inside of it.
Yes, thank you. And I really do want to reiterate exactly what Mary and John said. It was actually in the 1990s when, for me, when I was in the local jurisdiction, when we started the CAC model. And before that, it was so fragmented. And it was really a horrible experience where I felt like I was re-victimizing the children that were coming in. So we've moved and developed in that area. I do want to say, though, shaming and blaming the victim still is an issue, so much so that it perpetuates the violence in families. I worked with families generationally where there had been abuse. Actually, I recall a grandmother who told me, she said, I really resented you coming in helping my granddaughter because there was no one to help me. So those experiences of generations where there wasn't the help that perpetuated the violence. And what she started to do is actually what Lacy did. Her healing started with her sharing that with me in conversations where she actually started to journal for herself to start that healing. What's different now is more of a culture where we are listening to victims so that we can have that healing, that community healing and that community action and those efforts that support survivors of sexual assault. Community healing and community action are the two pillars from which Tarana Burke, the founder of the Me Too movement, uses to support female and male survivors that are healing. And what she said is, although we can't define what healing looks like for people, we can set the stage and give people the resources to have access to healing. And that means legitimate things like policy and laws that support survivors. That's what we're doing today. We are setting this stage, and thank you so much, Lacy, for allowing us to have this dialogue and for SCAN for supporting it, to set the stage for healing and action in our region through this dialogue, because there are other survivors of sexual assault that we don't address, male victims. We don't readily do that. And we need to set the stage for that to happen in order to heal. Community healing and community action are the next steps.
Yeah, I hope thank you, Valerie. I hope our our participants are jotting down those ideas of who they need to talk to. And I'm, this is the what needs to happen, because what hasn't changed. And I want to go to Cheryl, because this idea of what public policy should look like. Are the laws sufficient? Cheryl, what do you think?
I think the laws are becoming sufficient. We have a lever now that we didn't have in the 1990s, which is Title IX. And I'm talking about schools particularly, because that's what I study, is the abuse that happens in schools, both adult to student and student to student. So we do have that lever. We're not using it as effectively as we could in order to try to change the policies and practices in schools, but that is there. I think that one of the differences that I see that hasn't changed so much is school people understand mandated reporting as reporting about something that may have happened in the home, and you see the child come to school and you're concerned about the child. The connect between that and what happens at school and responsibilities of school people for what happens in schools isn't as strong yet among school people. We haven't said these two parts aren't separate. They're all one big protection of children. And so that's one of the issues I see that we need to work on. I also see that in schools, we still tend to, I see it in cases as recent as a few weeks ago, we still tend to say that the behaviors of male students toward female students are typical male things we can't do much about. That's how boys are, that's the culture, particularly athletic culture. And that, there's not really much the school can do about that. So I still see that. And I would say that about a third of the cases of the sexual abuse of students in schools is of males, and we don't acknowledge as much that, and we don't acknowledge the level of sexual abuse male to male within the academic quote unquote hazing culture, almost all of which is sexualized and sexual abuse male to male. So those are things that I don't see changing yet.
Yeah. Thank you, Cheryl. John, you're at the heart of change. What do you think is different now? What are we looking forward to? What changes are coming, do you think?
I think after going after Cheryl, she captured a lot of what has not changed. I think, culture by and large has not changed. And I think some of the slowness, shall we say, on changing policy is reflective of that. If we believe as a community that we need to further prepare ourselves, our parents, our children for being able to speak up for them, not speak up for themselves, but being able to rely on policy that is going to protect them. We don't have that policy always in place. We've allowed our culture to determine that, as Cheryl said, male athletes do certain things, and that's just something we're going to accept. People are going to act a certain way, and that's something we're going to accept. And our policies, whether they're policy within local government or federal government or state government, or as we're talking about here, policies within organizations, those are reflective of that slowness to change that we have not, as a community and frankly as a society, fully accepted and fully wrapped our heads around about how we take action. What I think has changed is luckily you're having more and more stakeholders, not just elected officials, but really stakeholders that are educated, that are a lot more understanding of not only in trauma-informed care, but also looking at the rights of those who have been victimized and seeing the need to speak up for them. I remember when I was growing up in the 90s, I know I might look a little older, but the conversations about consent were a lot different than what we're having now with frankly, with children. And that's a turn in the right direction. Are we perfect at it? Absolutely not. Because we see we see the gaps in that communication all the time through a number of examples. But I can tell you, I don't remember hearing as a boy growing up some of the same conversations that I know our students and families are having now. From a political standpoint, I think we're seeing, I think we're seeing some movement forward. It's not as much as I think, all would love, but it's definitely different from the 90s. And so maybe there's a bit of evolution there. I'll give us some credit as electeds there. But I do think you have more elected officials as of very recent that are keying into the challenges that we've had in the past with communicating on this issue. And we have folks that are working towards it. Sorry.
Yeah. Thank you, John. I love that you said we're choosing not to fix it. I know that's the frustration of academics as well, because we know what will make it better. But also for the hopeful idea that many of us in the room and others that we're connected to are people in power who have access, who can advocate for victims and survivors. And really that's what this whole conversation is about. And at the end, we're going to sort of ask you how all of you are going to do that. One final question to the panel, though. I'm going to come to each of you in turn, and I want to have another chance to speak Lacy's words and let you hear them again. Lacy asks, how loudly do you have to yell? Who is there to hear? And what will they do? She says, every child's story is a roadmap for the community to make children safer, to do things differently going forward. So what I'm going to ask each of you in turn is, how do those words ring true for you? I'm going to start with Valerie.
As an administrator now, I believe each child is unique. And although we have standardized procedures and practices, I want to keep learning from every situation where we are involved in cases. So it's the continuous learning. So we keep track of the similarities and trends. However, we must stay keen to the uniqueness. Each child's voice, let us listen to each child's voice. There are some nuances there. So although I'm keeping track of, like I said, similarities and trends, I am always looking for uniqueness. I don't believe in cookie cutter responses. I don't believe in that. And want to take each child's unique experience to heart and actually respond to that child's and that family's need.
Thank you, Valerie. Being in cases is so important for our learning. I'm going to pivot to Cheryl.
I'm sorry. Most of my life, people want to mute me. Now I have to get unmuted. I just think about, in terms of taking next steps, they're just, which is sort of a takeoff on what Valerie said, which is thinking about where we go. And there's so many directions. And in my work, one is working with schools to try to get policies changed and practices changed, and to have everybody take an active role in being responsible. And a lot of that requires really good training about what it looks like, what needs to be done, and we don't have that. And so I think about that a lot. It's not just one thing. It's a culture change. It's all of that. Starting, for me, in my work, starting in schools and getting schools to do work on policies and training would make a lot of difference, I think.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cheryl. Sue, I'm coming to you next. Again, this is the roadmap from the story, and how we do things differently. How does this ring true for you?
Again, I believe that training everyone in the workplace and the organization, and I agree with what John was talking about. It's a culture change. So back in the 90s, we're not talking about this stuff, and everything is hush hush and pushing everyone to the side, especially in different religions and in different cultures. But now, as more family life education is out there for our children, and more people are talking about these kinds of things more, it's easier for children to come and talk about it. But it's the parents that still have that education from the 90s, and still have that mentality and attitude, that are still struggling to accept this. And so I really think that we need to ensure that wherever we have a large community gathering, we are able to relay a message that there is a victim and a perpetrator, and the victim is never at fault. And we need to continue to reiterate, the victim is not at fault. And so that the community understands this. I know that in our mosque, we continue to talk about domestic violence every October, and a lot of people get offended. Now we need to talk about sexual assault. People may get offended, but we're going to have to do it because it's going to have to protect people. It happened in one mosque in one of the cities, and a courageous imam went up and talked about it. He was removed the next day, and he lost his job the next day. So we have to overcome these things, stand up at the and give our sermons, and be able to tell the community that sexual assault is wrong, sexual abuse is wrong. There's a victim, there's a perpetrator, and do not ever blame the victim. Let them be able to come to you. We need to make change wherever we are gathered in large community gatherings. And the individual giving the message is a trusted community individual. I'm saying this because I sit in sermons. So this is why I'm saying this. But whether it's in our churches, in our synagogues, or in our mosques, or in our schools, we need to talk about it in large gatherings.
Yeah, I mean, we need fierce words sometimes. Thank you, Suhir. John?
Yeah, I think going off of Suhir, I think government has the responsibility to do that as well. We have the responsibility, frankly, to shout from the mountaintops, because I think that helps to change our community's climate and our community's culture around not being afraid to have some of these discussions. We also have the responsibility to empower public servants to do their work, especially in this area. I took Lacy's story, about that individual that was dogged in kind of tracking down information and trying to address the issue, address her case. If we're not training and empowering our staff at the local level, at the state level, and at the federal level to have that type of kind of go-getterness when they see there's a perpetrator that needs to be brought to justice, we're not doing it right. If we're not putting the resources to the side for trainings, for capacity, we're not doing it right as well. And so, I think that's really what I think we need to do.
Thank you. And Mary, finally, what are your thoughts? How does this ring true for you?
Well, and I just wanted to say too, thank you so much, Lacy, for sharing your story. It was very powerful, and I think for those of us who do this work, it's so important to hear the voices of survivors, to make sure we stay grounded in why we do this work, and being open and ready to receive from the people we serve how to best support them. So just thank you for that. In listening to Lacy's story, I mean, what I kept coming back to in my mind, and to echo all the other points that were made, it's the cultural shift. It's not putting the responsibility for the victimization on the shoulders of the victim, and owning our culture and raising our boys into the type of men we want to see, and that are such an essential part of eradicating this issue. But one piece too, I think that's so important, there's been so much research around adverse childhood experiences, and we know that these types of experiences, if children experience them, not only is it going to impact their mental health, their emotional health, but it also impacts them physically. And as a community, then we have all of this lingering trauma history that's unresolved. And no one should have to pay a life sentence because they were victimized by someone who thought they could do whatever they wanted. And I guess the one thing I would just kind of end with, just from my perspective, the children that we failed to protect today are the adults that are going to struggle tomorrow. And as a community, both from a moral and ethical standpoint, but just from a selfish standpoint too, when we are able to have healthy, protected, well-rounded adults as part of our community is going to thrive and function better, and we break that cycle. And God willing, someday we'll all be out of a job because no one will need us. So that would be my last thing.
Thank you so much, Mary. You speak for us all, I know. And thank you so much to the panelists for your work, your ideas, and your support of all of our learning. So thank you so much. We are going to take a pivot to our guests and participants and hear a little bit about what you think. You may have some topics that you want to talk about further with your colleagues, with staff, with clients, or partner organizations. Things like bias, adultism, and parent or institutional support for victims. So I invite you to take a moment. If you've jotted down some notes, that's great. If you didn't, take a moment to think about how to extend the ideas, and there were many of them in this panel discussion, how to extend these ideas into your community conversations. So I think we're going to share a screen and put a slide up with a QR code. Now, if you haven't done this before, it's my favorite thing. Pick up a cell phone and put on the camera and go ahead and focus your camera on the QR, and then you'll see a link at the top. For those of you who aren't down with the QR code, we will put one in the chat right now that you can follow the link on your computer. And what you're going to see is this screen that you see here on the slide. So go ahead and get adjusted. Computers, following, there's the chat, the link in the chat, or your QR code. And what we'd like you to do is think about a topic that you need to raise and think about who you need to raise it with. I think John was very powerful in saying that we need to demand better. We can do better. And that really starts with us raising topics that maybe we haven't raised in the same way, or raising them with different folks. So you'll see 3 fields there. And here is an example. So if I want to talk about victim support, I'll put that in the first opening. And if I want to talk about it with parents, I'll put it in the second opening. And then if I also want to talk about that topic with someone else, I can put that in the third, and then click on submit. I want to mention here that you can put multiple answers in here. Once you've submitted one and you're feeling in the groove, go ahead and you'll see the blanks are there again. Put another topic that you want to discuss and who you want to discuss it with. And I hope someone puts in lawmakers, because they need us talking to them. So go ahead and enjoy this Menti. Let us know in the chat if you're not able, if you're having any difficulty. And I think we're going to bring Leah up because she and I are going to talk about what the results are. We're going to give you another minute to put these things in. And thank you for being thoughtful about this. I think prioritizing it, putting it in writing helps us to go ahead and have those difficult conversations when we've sort of put it in our calendar. Going to have a conversation, who I'm going to have it with, and what it's going to be about.
I think too, I mean, how I think about using this, certainly for allies and prevention, for training, we heard the need for training. As I think about our organization, meaning SCAN, we look to this community for advice on where we need to go. And so I think it's, I'm also going to use this as the things that kind of come out as the most important should be driving the conversation that we're having. I want to have more difficult conversations. I want to have more conversations so that this community, and I think this will be really interesting in terms of who we need to have those conversations with and what about. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, Leah, did this raise any conversation topic that maybe you want to have with someone?
I actually put it in, you know, the institutional abuse prevention, it's something that I think we, meaning SCAN, but me, meaning Leah, I'm incredibly passionate about, and something that I want to have conversation about. Peer-on-peer abuse, the needs of boys. I have 4 boys. They're all incredibly important to me, and quite frankly, obviously, as a survivor myself, I tend to take a female lens. I think it's important for me to recognize the lens that I look through. And having that conversation with obviously policymakers, parents, our team, as we grow as an organization, as we grow as a community, I want to take a real approach to what we're doing so that change can be. It's so easy to get kind of, I don't want to say comfortable, but it's easy to get comfortable doing what you've always done, right? Doing the trainings you've always done, doing the things you've always done. And this kind of helps to gauge where the community is so that we can evolve the things that we're doing, not just again, but it's just kind of humans in the world helping others.
In my planning meeting with Valerie, one of the things she said is, you know, I'm the one who says it. I'm the one who says peer-on-peer abuse. I'm the one, and people are like, you know, it's not what we do. And, you know, it is important to be that agitator, to be that person who's going to raise the topic, whether it be in your faith community, whether it be in the boardroom, wherever that happens to be courageous, really. And if we think about the courage it takes for a survivor to step forward, we can take just a little piece of that, I think.
Well, something that Sue said, I'm going to take with me, being brave, just being brave in general, is incredibly difficult in child protection. But saying the words, using the words, normalizing that the words child sexual abuse. Because if it's difficult for us to say, I can guarantee you it's impossible for a child to say. Mm-hmm. And so I just, that struck me. That struck me as we need to get comfortable saying the words so that we can have a conversation about it. So.
Yeah, okay. I can see their tray. Here we go. We've got,
okay.
and by the way, just because this is up, people can still put things in. So Leah, I'm just going to throw a couple things out for you that I'm seeing. We need to have more conversations with parents, clearly. And some of those conversations are around victim support. We want to also talk about lawmakers and how to support survivors.
Education, obviously, I mean, the conversation today, but education.
I'm just going to pause you guys real quick and pivot to a different screen share because I think we're not getting live updates here. So just bear with me.
Thank you. Thank you.
Children's mental health, obviously the conversation that Lacy was having, I believe it was with Cheryl, you know, around mental health supports. Wow.
Look at this.
Yeah, trauma informed. We do a tremendous amount of talking about and planning around in training around trauma-informed supports.
Yeah, I'm seeing lawmakers growing here.
Yeah.
My very eyes. School administrators, spreading the word about male victims. Love that too.
Absolutely. Communities, LGBTQ silencing in schools. Male survivors, we see male on here, peer-on-peer abuse. Yeah, normalizing trauma. Yes, we know the data. We know what statistics are on the number of children who've been abused, but normalizing trauma and resilience and what we need to do to.
And really, every one of those conversations makes a powerful difference to prevention and to the experience and recovery of victims. So thank you all for those conversations. And we hope that you have, let us know how they go. And I want to also say thank you to Lacy so much for giving us so much to work with here. So many stimulating ideas and novel ways of looking at the situation.
Yeah, thank you so much. I continue to add to the chat kind of as we go. I know there's some continuing. There are some questions and for Lacy, and it looks like she's responding. As we heard today, and most of us live every day, each of us has a responsibility for making children safer. As we sit with what we've learned today and what we've talked about today, I want to save a space for us to honor and celebrate a few champions who show up every single day to do this very work and have dedicated themselves to making our community safer for children. While I'm going to read the tributes because I don't want to miss words, shared by those who nominated these incredible people, I don't want you to be shy. You can stand up in your house or office, cheer, use your hands, or share emojis on the screen. Just promise to join me in celebration. Kathleen Donovan. Kathleen Donovan's entire professional life has been dedicated to supporting children and their families, focusing in particular on children with disabilities. Kathleen's consistent mantra when working with families continues to be stable, happy, and engaged families ultimately leads to the overall well-being of children and the entire family. Congratulations, Kathleen. Dr. Cheryl Shapiro has supported the Make a Change tattoo removal program since its inception. Coordinated by the Gang Response Intervention Team, MAC serves victims of trafficking as well as juveniles and adults committed to changing their lives and lifestyles by helping remove gang and trafficking related tattoos. Without Dr. Shapiro and the MAC team, the healing this program brings about would not be possible. Incredible work, Dr. Shapiro. Meg Turkson has always made school a community for parents. Parent education is her top priority. Because of Meg's leadership, more parents feel connected to their child's school. She creates a positive and nurturing environment for children and parents, inviting parents to come in and be a part of the school community. By building this connection, parents are volunteering in the classroom, staying connected to their child and their child's education. Congratulations, Meg. Violetta Malat, Jimena Rosa, and Leslie Chisholm have brought their skills as family advocates and parent liaisons to work and are always instrumental in organizing, advertising, recruiting, and believing in the need to better serve and support families. Their tireless work advocating has made sure that families have the support they need. Dr. Stephen Herring has been a strong supporter of child sexual abuse prevention since he began with the Alexandria Health Department. He quickly recognized and understood that child sexual abuse is a public health problem. He's partnered with the Center for Alexandria's Children to ensure that adults who work with children receive training in child sexual abuse prevention and has mandated that all his employees participate in training and provides the resources needed to deliver training throughout the city for free. We want to congratulate all of our honorees. You are so much about what makes this community safe for children. A lot of the words that you saw coming up when we were talking relate to parents, relate to training, relate to the work you do every day. And so thank you so much for all that you invest in our collective mission to keep children safe. This has been fantastic. Let's pause on the chat for a second if we can, because we're going to put a link into the chat so that you can sign up to receive Lacy's book. There'll be a QR code going on the screen here in a moment. But for those of you who would rather click the link, yes, there you go. I want to also do a special thank you to our keynote speaker again, Lacy, you're fantastic. Our panelists, each one of you, what a great conversation. Our event partner, AT&T, I know Garrett's on. Thank you, AT&T, for sponsoring Allies in Prevention the year, including today's event, and allowing us to gift copies of Lacy's memoir, Notes on the Silencing. AT&T has been partnering with SCAN for years, helping us motivate the change we want for children. And again, this year has recommitted to being a part of building the capacity of the front line of all of you. We are going to share with you a video here in a second about AT&T, and I want you to watch, because you're going to see in this video, and if you've ever engaged with Garrett or anyone at AT&T, exactly why they're a part not only of this community, but are standing right beside us protecting children.
I live this mission by ensuring that every voice and story is heard.
By connecting AT&T employees with their communities and ways they can make a difference in the world.
It's about doing what's right and being involved and making an impact.
I live this mission by bridging the gap between our advertisers and our clients through sending messages that matters most to them.
Yo inspiro el progreso de la humanidad cuando llevamos nuestro servicio de Internet a los lugares más apartados para hacer del mundo un lugar mejor. Un clic a la vez.
I inspire human progress by ensuring that everyone can bring their authentic selves to work.
By hopefully never taking for granted what it means to be part of a company that can have such extraordinary impact.
I live this mission every day by investing in some of the most talented, diverse group of artists imaginable.
The progress of being able to connect cultures and people and audiences in a global society that we are today, with so many differences and so many different opinions about things, but if you're able to come together and watch one show, relate to one character together, I mean, talk about progress.
We have communication, entertainment, and a frictionless commerce environment at our fingertips.
I mean, we have freaking geniuses in IoT.
It's more than just our shows and our showrunners care about these issues. We as a brand do as well.
When I wake up every morning, I ask myself, you know, what's my why?
I inspire human progress by helping employees live true and just do the right thing, no compromises.
By taking the possibilities of innovation to solutions to make life better.
I inspire human progress by making sure first responders have the connectivity they need to both keep themselves and their communities safe.
It's thinking about the new opportunities that are out there. What are the challenges that have never been solved before? And how are we in a unique position to drive that forward for the industry?
AT&T is not only committed to delivering great products to our customers, but taking care of entire communities where we operate.
It's been great seeing AT&T evolve from broadband to wireless to TV entertainment, but knowing that this is the underlying intention and this is what our goal is to really further society, I think that's what really makes me proud to be working for AT&T.
Thank you all again. We're going to keep the room open for a few minutes. I believe we have, so our work is just beginning. I know it's the end of April and the end of Child Abuse Prevention Month, but our work, Allies, and certainly the work of those who keep children safe is just beginning. The work of Allies in Prevention is just beginning. So we have another event coming up. We're going to be doing trainings throughout the year, thanks to our partners at AT&T. You are going to continue to get content and have these types of conversations. So please register now. We'll send out a registration later as well, so that you can be a part of this continuing conversation and community training. So thank you all for being here today, and have a wonderful rest of the Friday and weekend. And happy May already.